Hi, Stephen and Peter. Welcome to PMC Studio London. It's a pleasure to have you guys here today. Stephen, a question for you. I've been listening to some of your music, and like one of the main things that gets me is the sort of spatial depth, width, and clarity. And how do you go about maintaining that sort of thing?
Well, I've always liked music with layers, and right from the very beginning when I was getting into music as a kid, I loved big productions. I loved music which had elements of what you would call sound design. So not just the rhythm guitar, not just the drum, not just the bass, not just the vocal, but the backing vocals, the acoustic guitar, the little moments that come in, just, maybe in the middle of verse 2, a little event or something. And I grew up with, in a house where my dad listened to stuff like Dark Side of the Moon and Tubular Bells, and my mum listened to classic disco and soul music of the late 70s. And there was a lot of that going on. And as I got older, I realised that a lot of those details sometimes would get lost in stereo. And that's a good thing too, because it meant you'd be listening to a record for the 12th time and you'd be hearing stuff you'd not noticed before, But to me, when I first understood there was this thing called spatial audio, originally it was 5.1 that I got into, and now Atmos and full spatial, it was a gift to be able to bring out those little details, those little elements of sound design, those layers that you didn't necessarily notice in stereo. And I think it just creates a much more kind of cinematic sort of, landscape to be able to position sound. So I think it does depend on the kind of music. For the kind of music that I make, it's perfect. What you might call conceptual rock, or this idea of the album as a kind of musical continuum, a musical journey. It's absolutely, it's the perfect landscape for me to paint with.
Awesome. And kind of a similar question to you, Peter. So when you kind of look at designing a speaker to kind of get all of these attributes so that you can get all of those amazing clarity and spatial parts out, how do you kind of go about maintaining and building a speaker like that?
Well, it's the sort of same principle really from mono through to stereo to spatial, really. It's producing a speaker that's so neutral, very low distortion. And I think when we first started doing stereo, we were really concentrating on the depth, width and height information. To me, that's the thing that brings realism to sound. And now we've got the benefit of spatial audio. I mean, we've always been interested, and right from the beginning of PMC, we were always firm advocates of 5.1, then 7.1, and now we've got the spatial formats. I mean, the old format suffered from the fact there were too many conflicting, principles. I mean, even going back to quadraphonic, where there were lots of different versions, different choices. Whereas today, I think people are much more clear on the gear they want and what they're expecting. And the lovely thing about these formats is that they translate into different systems, big systems and small systems, which the old formats didn't. You had fixed speakers and that was it, and that was quite a drawback. In terms of recreating that 360-degree sound field, all the speakers have to be voiced the same. So one of the big principles at PMC is from the tiniest speakers to the largest. If you play, say, somebody speaking through them, they sound exactly the same. It gives you that naturalness to the whole performance and how they will lock together, really. You get some speakers where it sounds like there are lots of competing speakers rather than producing a holistic sort of sound.
How do you think the quality of the recording affects the listener?
How do I think the quality of the recording affects the listener? Well, that's a good question. I think it depends on the person, obviously. There are people out there that are interested in sonic excellence, and I include myself in that group of people. But at the end of the day, obviously the music has to be the primary consideration. You've still got to write great material. You've still got to arrange it properly. I have for a long time been an advocate of sonic excellence in recording, and again that comes back to what I grew up with. I grew up listening to albums like Dark Side of the Moon and all those great Trevor Horn productions from the 80s. That's my thing. When people ask me what I am, I don't say I'm a guitar player, I don't say I'm a songwriter, I say I'm someone that makes records. And what I mean by that is that I'm in love with the idea of being able to create these kind of sonic, I want to call them masterpieces, but these beautiful kind of edifices of sound and music and songwriting and production and arrangement all together. So I'm interested in this idea of making records. And because of the albums I grew up with, I love the idea of making records which are like this beautiful, they have this kind of beautiful audiophile quality, recording at higher resolution, mixing in multi-channel, perfecting things. And that's been something I've been interested in right from the very beginning when I was, falling in love with making music. I wasn't falling in love with the idea of being a rock star, of being a guitar hero or performing on stage or anything like that. I fell in love with the principle of making these beautiful things, pieces of cinema for the ears. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And the same question to you, Peter.
What was the same question?
So the same question was, how do you feel that? How do you feel like the recording quality affects the listener?
How the recording? Well, I think like Stephen, I believe that the music comes first. That's the focus, really. Without that, we're all doomed, really, because we wouldn't be building speakers. But yeah, the focus has got to be on the music, and obviously people are into high fidelity and all the rest of it. They want really high quality sound, but it shouldn't be. It's not the only goal in the whole process. I think for me, spatial audio has now made things much more real. It's how we listen. I mean, while we're speaking, you're listening to reflections off the ceilings and the wall from 360 degrees, and our brains are telling you that my voice is real. So spatial audio recreates that 360 field, so that things sound real. And to me, that's wonderful. For those that have got a system like that, but if they're happy to listen to it on a transistor radio, great as well. But I think for me, it's the investment in the future. We don't know what people will be listening to in 50 years' time. The equipment they will be able to listen to the music recorded today, we can't even imagine, like they couldn't 50 years ago. And if we can capture that music in the best possible way now, and using good speakers to be able to monitor all the pitfalls of that recording, then we know that they're future-proof. I mean, I'm thinking particularly of old recordings like Buddy Holly in the 50s. They couldn't have possibly known how wonderful those stereo recordings were, and we're appreciating them now. And I think if we capture things in spatial audio now to the best quality, we're going to, the future generations are going to enjoy that music as well.
I think maybe just one thing I would add to that. It's worth saying that, of course, in terms of the way people experience and engage with music, broadly speaking, convenience always wins out over quality of experience. And most people are listening to compressed MP3s or whatever on Spotify or whatever. But there is a small but growing community of people that do genuinely care about the quality of experience. And that's the kind of fan base, if I can call them that I'm trying to appeal to. So trying to raise the bar on people's expectations of what they expect from audio. And it is growing. It is growing. I think people are, a small but growing community of people are genuinely interested in surround sound, spatial audio, or the audio. There's a lot of websites now dedicated to allowing just stereo recordings to be downloaded or experienced in very high resolution. And that is the pendulum swinging a little bit. A little bit back in the opposite direction.
I suppose we sort of step backwards in order to attain the new technology, and then as everything catches up, and the streaming formats become wider bandwidth and everything starts to get quicker again, all of a sudden the quality element comes back into play.
Well, I hope so. One of the things I've been slightly disappointed with is that the full resolution audio hasn't become more prevalent as because MP3s, of course, were developed in the days when bandwidth was very narrow and you couldn't stream. And now you can. Everyone's got, gigabytes and gigabytes of hard disk space. They've got fiber and very high speed internet, and yet people still choose to listen to compressed audio. And I think it's just what they're used to. So it is the convenience. So it's just a question of educating. Sounds like a very pompous word, and I don't mean it, but it is a question of making people aware, I think, of the fact they don't have to listen to this compressed audio.
So, Stephen, there's been a lot of talk about immersive audio, and you've embraced the format. So kind of, what do you think about the format? How did you get into the format, and what do you think the benefits are of the format?
Obviously, I love it. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't. For me, spatial audio, there are some people who are very sceptical about spatial audio, and yet they love stereo. To which my reply is, you like stereo, you like spatial audio. When you have sound coming from more than one direction, it is, by definition, spatial audio. So there's a lot of people out there that love stereo, sceptical about maybe this idea of sound coming from above them and behind them too. And my experience is if you play them the right track, in the right context, you can convert them. And a lot of people have had bad experiences, I think, with hearing badly mixed material or spatial audio in the wrong, which is why I think this event we're doing is for me, is so exciting, because we're going to have an incredible system, interesting music, which is hopefully mixed well by yours truly, which is going to hopefully convert people to the cause. it's something which I think, again, this comes back to my original point, it does depend on the music, but if you have any degree of detail or layering in your music, it's a no-brainer. The amount of times I've had artists, I mean, I've been commissioned to remix classic albums from the past, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. And the artist generally initially a little bit skeptical until I can get them to my studio and play them their track.
Yeah.
And then almost without fail, by the end of the first track they've heard of their own in spatial audio, they're jumping up and down in their chairs saying, "It's amazing."
Yeah.
Because what's not to love? What's not to love? All that detail they work so hard to put into their music and their arrangements that was kind of a little bit overlooked or lost in the stereo. Suddenly they can hear it all that work they put into creating these layers and these textures and these intricacies and sounds on the music. And again, it does depend on the music, always with that caveat. But if it is that kind of music, what's not to love? And I think the same is true of the listener as well. What's not to love when you hear your favourite music and you're inside it?
Yeah, in another dimension. Yeah.
It's not just coming from, you know, two directions. It's coming from all these directions, and you're literally inside the music with the artist. Like I say, what's not to love about that?
And Peter, sort of a very similar question, I suppose, kind of to you as well. But so PMC has been, you know, part of kind of multi-channel audio from the early days, if you like. So, kind of how did we get into that, and where do you see it going with the change to immersive formats?
It started back when we first started in the 90s, when DTS approached us and said, "Would you like to play some of our early 5.1 material?" And we used to do big exhibitions. And it was always fascinating, and how many people used to come to the stand just to be knocked out by 5.1. This is about 92, 93. So we always found that it was a great interest. And I think the thing was that most people who listen to surround and now spatial formats often haven't heard it with good surround speakers. You know, a lot of people then used to invest in great speakers at the front and then use very inexpensive speakers for the rear. And you can't do it. You know, you can, but it pulls everything down to a lowest common denominator. When you hear a proper 5.1 system or a spatial audio system, then it's very involving. You know, there are so many formats that didn't support really good quality rear channels in the past. Now the sky's the limit. You know, we don't have that drawback. So now you can start to understand, you know, why it's so successful. I think the other thing I didn't mention was the fact that our speakers are very, very strong design ethic is to get a very wide dispersion from the speakers, and in spatial audio that becomes even more important than stereo, because then you get a seamless blend between all the channels, and that's really important in terms of, you know, producing that 360-degree holographic image.
That's interesting, Pete, what you're saying about a lot of people had systems where the speakers, the additional speakers, were kind of inferior to the front line. Because actually, I've spoken to some other people that mix in spatial and 5.1, and they start to think about that when they're mixing. So they don't put as much information as they might naturally be inclined to do in the heights or the rears or the sides. They're like, oh no, people might not have very good speakers. And you can't be thinking that way when you're trying to be creative. You want to be creative, you want to create this incredible three-dimensional immersive mix, but there are producers out there who say, oh no, I'm just going to put the reverb in the back, and it makes for a boring spatial audio mix. And I never think like, I've never underestimated the system that this, and I, you know, maybe I should, maybe that's my folly, but I've never underestimated the quality of the system that I think people are going to potentially. I mix for people who've got fantastic systems. And I put a lot of stuff in the back, and I put a lot of stuff in the sides, and I put a lot of stuff in the heights, and I never think to myself, oh, you know, maybe I shouldn't do that just in case they haven't got, because that's the worst, you know, when you're being creative, the worst thing is you can be trying to second guess the medium through which your music is going to be played.
Of course.
And of course, the speaker manufacturer is always going to say use expensive speakers.
Of course,
at the rear as well.
of course,
But it's true. I mean, it you know, it ruins it if you do not have equal billing, if you like, on all channels. It's much more involving, and I'm sure that's why it hasn't been successful in the past, and probably why it's more successful now. Because of the, you know, technology's moved on, and we're able to do more for less cost, really.
So Stephen, with the new album Harmony Codex, was that originally designed to sort of be conceived in stereo, or for people to receive this in Atmos?
It's a good question. I don't have a set answer for you. Let's just say that this is the first time I made an album where I was aware that it would ultimately be mixed into full spatial audio. And I've always mixed in 5.1 in the past, but 4 or 5 years ago, I first got into Dolby Atmos, and this is the first album I've really made with the knowledge that not only did I want to do a mix in spatial audio, but I wanted to raise the bar in terms of what's possible in Dolby Atmos. And I say that because I've spent a lot of time over the last few years remixing, you know, catalog stuff into Atmos, classic albums from the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, and also some of my own projects. This is an album where I knew from the very beginning I want to do something here which is going to be like demo level. This is an album that I want people to use to demonstrate what's possible with spatial audio. And I'm not going to tell you that for the whole process it was always foremost in my mind, because at the end of the day I was trying to write great songs and make something that sounded sonically great in stereo as well, obviously, because you have to concede that ultimately most people are still going to only hear it in stereo. So. But at the same time, I think there were certainly points in the process where I was sort of thinking, oh, that's going to sound good.
Where it kind of sort of affects your judgment of, oh, if I put that here, or if I
or something like, oh yeah, that backing vocal, maybe I'll track that 6 times instead of twice. Because then I can have one in each corner. So there were little moments like that where I think I was reminding myself, yes, you are going to be doing this in spatial audio, and yes, you should maybe do that. Track that 4 or 5 times instead of twice, because then you can position it in. So there was certainly an awareness that and definitely an ambition or an aspiration to try to do something which would be demo level in terms of what. Not, I mean, I say that because I'm very also conscious of not being gimmicky with my spatial audio mixes. One of the reasons I think a lot of artists sometimes are a bit cagey about their stuff being remixed into spatial audio is that their only kind of experience of spatial audio is seeing some sci-fi movie in the cinema where there are like spacecraft whizzing over the head and explosions go, and they suddenly think to themselves, oh my god, that my music's going to be like that. And my reply to that is always, well, you wouldn't do that in stereo. So why would you do that in spatial? You wouldn't have your guitar whizzing between the left and right speaker for the whole track. So you wouldn't do that in spatial either. So it's more a question of finding a kind of more immersive context for the music. And yeah, you have moments where something lends itself, like a little sound design moment, lend itself to moving. So the reason I say that is, for me, it's always been a question of getting a good balance between something that's very active in spatial, but not annoying. And something that you do want to go back to and listen to repeatedly. And it's not going to be constantly bashing you over the head with like, hey, look how active this thing's whizzing over your head the whole time. So all of those things kind of came to bear, I think, when I wanted to create the spatial audio mix for the Harmony Codex. Try and create something which people would want to use as a demo standard for Atmos, but not to the point of it being gimmicky or just irritating to listen to.
Cool. So, I mean, more importantly, where can people start listening to this? Where is it available? What's it available on? In stereo, in multi-channel?
So it's available in all the usual places in stereo, streaming services, CD, vinyl. You know, a lot of people out there are just vinyl purists these days, and I'm somebody that loves vinyl myself too. So which is kind of, you know, the other side of the same coin in a way in terms of being an audiophile. Some audiophiles have gone in the sort of spatial audio direction. Some have gone back to vinyl. You know, and so it's available in all those formats. The spatial audio mix is available to stream from platforms like Apple, Tidal, but it's compressed. So this is the way to hear it, folks. Off Blu-ray, you know, in full resolution. I mean, I did record the whole album at 9624, so it's very high resolution audio. Worked very hard at, you know, like I said, trying to create sonic excellence.
Lovely.
And there are people, obviously, out there that do listen to spatial audio from Blu-ray. And, again, you know, the same kind of people who still buy Blu-rays to watch movies in 4K and things like that. So, again, I like to think that market is gradual. It's not huge. It is a niche, but it is expanding and it is growing. So I'm very committed to the idea of physical Blu-ray, representing spatial audio on physical Blu-ray.
Perfect. Well, it was a pleasure to have you both here today.
Thank you very much.